What you're about to hear is the story of how a self-proclaimed neighborhood queen tried to hijack the deadliest cabin on the lake, only to realize too late that she'd picked a fight with a dead man who spent 40 years planning for her arrival. My name's Trevor Donnelly, and 3 weeks ago, I thought the worst thing about losing Dad was the grief. Turns out I was dead wrong. See, my old man, Thomas Donnelly, was an Army Corps engineer with 2 tours in Vietnam and 30 years of experience building bridges that could survive anything from a monsoon to a mortar shell. When he retired back in '92, he bought this little 40-acre slice of heaven on Lake Whitmore, a weathered dock, a lot of pine trees, and a cabin that held 40 years of our memories. Walking up to that place always meant stepping into his world. The sharp scent of cedar logs, the metallic click of his old military compass on the mantel, and that soft whistle of wine through the gaps he'd engineered for ventilation. And other purposes. Dad was always tinkering, you know? Motion sensors disguised as garden gnomes, pressure plates under decorative stones, what he called woodland security features while giving me a wink. Boy, he'd chuckle. You never know when uninvited guests might need a proper welcome. He spent decades installing mysterious wires behind dock planks and hidden systems I never fully understood, until Karen Blackwood showed up. Karen is the HOA president. Perfect blonde hair that defies physics, matching athleisure that costs more than my truck, and a white Escalade with personalized plates. She moved here from some Connecticut suburb where diversity means owning both a BMW and a Mercedes, and she brought this refined vision for Lake Whitmore that didn't include people like us. The first time I met her was 2 days after Dad's funeral. I was there to start the impossible task of sorting through his life, but instead, I found 14 official violations taped to the front door. Our dock was non-conforming. Dad's wildflower garden attracted inappropriate wildlife, butterflies apparently, and our mailbox showed inadequate community presentation. Total fines? $8,000 plus $200 a day until I complied. Karen pulled up in a cloud of expensive perfume and gravel dust, looking at our cabin like she'd just discovered a nest of rats. "Such a tragedy about your father," she said in that saccharine voice that hides a heart of frozen nitrogen. But Lake Whitmore is evolving. We're cultivating an environment for families who appreciate standards. Perhaps you'd be happier in a manufactured home community inland, something more suited to your lifestyle requirements. It was surgical. She never said poor or working class, but the message was loud and clear. This wasn't property maintenance. It was systematic economic warfare. She wanted us out so her husband's development company could flip the lot for a killing. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated a soldier's son. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen went full psychological warfare. She filed complaints saying the cabin was an environmental hazard. She dragged trash from her own yard to scatter around our dock for proof of neglect, and she even convinced a crooked county inspector to mark us for condemnation. The worst part? She got a restraining order against me, claiming my surveillance, actually me just sitting on my porch, made her fear for her safety. She legally banned me from my own dock, the very spot where I'd scattered Dad's ashes 3 weeks prior. I stood in my yard, watching her laugh from her deck across the water, listening to the loons call, Dad's favorite sound, and I realized she wasn't just stealing land, she was trying to erase him. That's when I went to Dad's military foot locker and pulled out his old operational notebooks. Suddenly, 40 years of eccentric improvements made perfect sense. The climax came when Karen decided to host a community celebration on my property while I was supposedly away at a conference. She'd already filed the paperwork for an emergency HOA seizure, claiming the property was abandoned and a public nuisance. She invited 50 guests, hired a DJ, and set up catering on my lawn, planning to toast her victory on the land she'd stolen. But Dad's systems were automated. They didn't need me there. When the guest count hit 50, the security features activated. That rustic sprinkler system, it wasn't just water. It was filled with a harmless but permanent purple dye, mixed with a biodegradable adhesive that wouldn't wash off for weeks. Imagine 50 of the town's wealthiest retirees, suddenly looking like they'd been dipped in grape juice. Then, the speakers hidden in the garden gnomes, the ones Karen called unsightly, began blasting military cadence songs at 120 decibels. The safety dock? It was a pressure-sensitive platform. When Karen stepped onto it to give her victory speech, it smoothly tilted, dumping her and her expensive catering into 3 feet of muddy lake water, while a hidden camera captured every glorious, dripping second. While she was screaming in the mud, my lawyer, Sarah Chun, a woman Dad had been paying a monthly retainer to since 1995 just for this specific scenario, was filing a federal racketeering lawsuit. See, Dad had recorded everything. Every bribe Karen offered the inspector, every conversation with her husband about cleaning out the military trash, every staged photo. It was all on high-definition audio and video, gathered by systems that predated the HOA's very existence. Turns out, our property was never even subject to HOA authority because of ironclad grandfather clauses in the deed. Karen hadn't just harassed a neighbor. She'd committed federal fraud, civil rights violations, and extortion. By the time the sun went down, Karen wasn't just purple and wet. She was bankrupt. The community celebration ended with 3 police cruisers and a team of federal investigators seizing her husband's business records. Blackwood Estates collapsed overnight, and the refined neighbors who'd signed her petitions suddenly couldn't remember her name. I'm sitting on that dock now, the one that was supposed to be demolished. The water is quiet, the loons are calling, and the air still smells like cedar and Old Spice. Karen is facing 3 to 5 years. Her Escalade has been repossessed, and she's currently living in one of those inland manufactured homes she suggested for me. I guess she finally found a community suited to her lifestyle requirements. It makes you think, though, how many people lose their family legacy because they don't have a Thomas Donnelly in their corner? We talk a lot about community standards, but when does improving the neighborhood just become a fancy word for bullying? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever dealt with a Karen who thought she owned the world? How far would you go to protect your family's history? Let's talk about justice and maybe, just maybe, always check your garden gnomes for microphones.